co-founder of scalespark.ai, and we focus on taking away the burden of operations for growth stage founders so that you can focus on growth by building out all your operations business infrastructure. And with me today, I have a wonderful panel, and I'll have them each introduce themselves, starting with Aisha.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Aisha Pandor. I am co-founder of a South African company called Sweep South, as well as a US-based digital health company called Pandora Health. I'm also a co-founding partner and now a venture partner in a fund called E4E Africa. We're in the process of raising our third fund, which is a permanent capital vehicle. So I have experience starting my first company, Sweep South, around 11 years ago in bootstrapping and scaling that. And then starting a new venture in a different country here in the US, where I'm now based, and starting that. And then I've also had the opportunity to have conversations from the other side of the table as an investor who's investing in companies as well.
Thank you, Aisha. And why don't we go over to Kathis?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kedis, and I am a co-founder CEO of a company called Puloli. We are a methane emissions data SaaS company based here in San Francisco. This is my third startup. This is when I'm with a co-founding CEO and two other startups very relevant to this bootstrap and ops optimization topic we're going to talk about today. I'll go into more details in the next time around, but glad to be part of this forum.
Thank you. And Nicola.
Hello, Maria. Thanks so much for inviting me on this. It's lovely to be here. I'm Nicola Wall, and I'm co-founder of two companies, both in life sciences. The first company I founded 10 years this year, actually, A40 Development, and it's what's called a CRO, so it's a clinical research company, and I can talk about bootstrapping ad nauseum with that. So I was very privileged to be able to found that with a very old and dear friend of mine, and we built that business. We're still running that business. But last year, I co-founded a new biotech company because we said, why not go for it and develop our own medicines while we're at it? So probably have picked maybe two of the hardest businesses ever to have founded. So many different learnings and international perspective on all of that. So it's great to be here and to be able to hopefully impart some of that learning today.
Thank you. And Serge.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Maria. And I echo Nicola's sentiment on you having us here. So, hi, everyone. My name is Serge Muzu. I'm the founder and CEO of Velza, which is the infrastructure platform getting creators paid. I've been a serial entrepreneur, mostly started my first company when I was in high school. So when I was 16, ended up exiting that company when I was 21. And since then, I've just been building businesses. And so Velza is my latest venture that actually spun from my main company, where we help accountants and CPAs automate tax filing and advisory reporting. This is where I saw the issue. And we just decided, instead of, keeping the solution within one company, we decided to just spin it up as its own company because it just had so much more viability and virality. Viability. And so this is what led to Velza now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Before we continue, also just a bit of housekeeping. So I would ask the audience to please just keep your microphones muted. And if you have any questions for the panel as we go on, please drop that in the chat and I'll bring them in as we continue. But feel free to post your questions in the chat. So let's first lead off with a definition around what bootstrapping means, because I think it means different things for different people. So what's your perspectives on bootstrapping? And why don't we start with you, Nicola?
It's a funny term, isn't it? So to me, bootstrapping was you got to put your own cold hard cash and your own resources into your company to get it off the ground. And it is by doing that, I feel that you demonstrate your commitment and you demonstrate it to an external audience. And I think it's probably also synonymous with, you know, how much of that is coming from friends and family and everything else. But to me, the way we looked at it with our first company was we wanted to be able to put our own money into it and build it and get a customer base. That was very, very important to us. Obviously, in our second business, it's a much different story, but it's a funny term. Yeah, and again, it'd be great to hear from the rest of the panel, but we started it, we put our own money, our own time and resources into the company.
Thank you. Serge, Katis, Aisha.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term bootstrapping definitely is misconstrued heavily, especially coming from Silicon Valley. And a lot of what Nicholas says, is true, right? In terms of when you're bootstrapping, people anticipate that you're the one putting your own capital into the company. Maybe sometimes you don't even have capital and you're trying to figure it out, right? But I think in modern times, people who have been in the more with startups just hear the term bootstrapping and they think, hey, I have to figure everything out by myself. I have to put the cash in. And the reality is that's not always the case, right? Yes, technically you're bootstrapping if you haven't raised venture funding, right? And so you hear a lot of companies that say, hey, we've bootstrapped this to this point. But what a lot of people don't know is that those people have been getting help, right? Whether it's a partner, it's a personal friend, whomever, right? There's oftentimes someone somewhere, giving you some sort of capital, financial support, right? Financial support or just maybe support in general. That's helping you move your company along, right? And so, oftentimes when people hear that, they just think, hey, I have to figure everything out by myself. It's like, no. You can look around you. You can look in your network and see who can support you in getting that business off the ground without necessarily having to scrap up every single penny that you have, right? I mean, sure, as a founder, you should be doing that anyways, right? You're going to be investing in your company anyways. But, don't be afraid to look around and actually try to find, hey, who's like in my network that can actually help me get something off the ground, right? And that still can be bootstrapping. But anyways, the whole premise is don't get so hung up on the fact that you have to, find your own nickels and, whatever, right? Scratch the pen for yourself to get off the ground. Look to your network for ways in which people can help you.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of two other dimensions besides the first definition that Nicola and Serge mentioned. And that has to do with something to do with the capital efficiency in the sense when you have a go-to-market plan for a startup, you have two aspects to it. And some people have successfully done this in a previous generations of startups, which is to see, can you get a customer to make a commitment to buy something such that you have a shortest runway or shortest path to the first revenue. And that is easily said than done. And it is not applicable to all verticals. But the verticals that I have been part of, that has been reasonably feasible, meaning in one of the startups I was part of with, in fact, the customer gave a services contract, money up front, to deliver a product in 6 months, an outcome in 6 months. And that effectively bootstrapped the company without ever having to take dilutive funding. So that, in practical sense, that's how I interpret bootstrapping, in the sense, yes, it is your personal, you are putting some of your personal fund, you are getting some friends and family funds, but more importantly, do you have a creative pathway where you actually get the customer money as early as possible and get yourself going. Again, that's not applicable to all of the things. Some of the things Nicola are doing is not practical in this sense, but it is practical and applicable to other verticals. So I just want to put that kind of a extended or stretch definition of bootstrap.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I don't think there's too much I can add to that except just to echo what Kathis is saying, that there's a mindset that also comes with bootstrapping, which is that you have constraints that force you to have huge clarity early on about the product that you're building and what customers will pay for and trying to get customers to pay. Um, I'm I'm probably like the most extreme version of bootstrapping with our first business, where as an early career professional, I'd worked in management consulting, saved up enough to buy a house and put down a deposit on the house. And then when we started our company, we sold not just the house, but everything inside it, beds, couches, tables, everything to fund the business. So that's sort of the very extreme version. But the reality is that starting a business through bootstrapping is hard. And the term bootstrapping is meant to imply something that is incredibly difficult, right? I think it came from like a physics question. Why can't a person pull themselves up by their own bootstraps? And so it is sort of doing it the hard way. And as everyone has said, on the one hand, it's about not relying on outside capital to get to a point where your business is generating revenue or can sort of stand on its own 2 feet. And on the other hand, it's a mindset that looks at getting customers early to validate what it is that you're building, doing things that yourself, instead of hiring people to do those things, focusing on unit economics, and sort of proving out the product before you try and get other people to put money into it who are not customers.
Thank you. And at what stage do you consider the bootstrap phase to be over, and does it only happen very early on in the company, or are there different stages where you go back into it?
Yeah, I can jump in. I have a definition for that. And that is when you have leverage in the valuation conversation with the investor, which is usually almost always you have a revenue trajectory that is an appealing metric to multiple investors. So you are in the driver's seat, you have the leverage, and you are driving the valuation and the terms of the first dilutive funding. I think that milestone is where I consider the bootstrapping ending, because at that point have a reasonable runway. You are most likely not yet profitable, but you have a reasonable top line going, and top line is growing month over month or quarter over quarter. That conversation means you are in charge of any valuation conversation, and you can dictate, for the most part, the terms of the first dilutive funding. To me, that is the definition of ending the bootstrap phase, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would even say, the faster you can get out of the bootstrapping phase, the better, right? Like you're not building a business to be bootstrapped forever, right? So, the first step is getting that customer revenue in, like Aki said, and then the immediate next is like finding a way to not be in that bootstrap phase, right? Because when you're bootstrapping a business, you're slowing down the rate at which you can grow, right? And so the faster you can find ways to get capital in the door, the faster you're able to move and grow the business, to a point where you actually thriving.
Yeah. I agree, but I also have a slightly different take. So I remember raising a seed round with our first business and raising not enough to get us to the point where we could repeatably and sustainably sort of project growth out. And so what we did is, and we, raising has always also just been a struggle for me. It's probably been one of like the hardest things, we get to it, but it's always hard. It's never sort of just like money flies at you. And so we raised, and the decision we had to make, and we've had to do this a few times, was we'll partially bootstrap still and sort of subsidize. So we'll raise to get to point X in the future, but we're still going to have to partially subsidize, whether it's ourselves, because bootstrapping can also mean, as a founder, I'm having to contribute to the business continuously, or I'm not covering my own costs. And so we've been there multiple times where we've been in that situation. So that's one where sort of it's ongoing, even post external capital coming in. And then there are also phases in our business where through scaling, we've had to get back into a bootstrapping strategy or mentality. So two examples of that. One is we've launched in our first business in countries outside of South Africa. We didn't want to use investor capital necessarily for new operations. And so we started off very, very small at scale that like doesn't make sense in terms of contribution to top line for the overall business. But the sort of strategy was we'll bootstrap this in this new market. And then once we see enough signal, we can start investing into the business. And we've done the same thing with new verticals, so new service lines. So our first business is it's a services platform, services marketplace. And so, yeah, we've done that. And then maybe the last sort of example is just mentality wise. Post-COVID, the sort of market pullback, we didn't necessarily bootstrap from a funding perspective, but certainly sort of psychologically had to go back into that space as a business where it was like, every single rand or dollar of spend counts. And you've got to think about this as if this was, your own very scarce personal money.
Can I just add one other point to that? So, and again, talking about maybe extremes. So our initial business model was to just grow with customer revenue, and that's what we did. So however you want to categorize that, and we actually managed to grow the business without, now, and I get it that that's extreme, but we had built a great base of customers, and we were able to grow the staff and grow revenue, and then reinvest that revenue into our business. And, I just kind of wanted to put out a bit of a shout out for that that is possible. But equally, now I'm facing the direct opposite situation, because when you're in the medical product development business, there's you can't do that. So you absolutely have to know at which point, which we are at now, is that you want good, smart investor money then to come in. And I think we're going to talk about that a bit more, aren't we, Maria?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask a question about, organic growth versus bootstrapping. Is organic growth seen as bootstrapping, or is just a different focus around how you scale the company?
I think it's a different focus. And again, it's just getting tied up in definitions. I think it's about really having that vision for your company and knowing what it is you want to do. How do you want to grow? What does your plan look like? And, obviously, I think we all agree getting investment means exponential growth in most different types of companies. Like I said, the clinical research business is definitely, it's a bit different and out there by itself, and very much as a service business. But to me, it's just about, are you running a good business model? So how are you generating revenue at the end of the day? And what do you need to do that? If you have enough revenue coming in to grow exponentially, fantastic. But generally, it's being able to get your company ready to be able to take on an external partners to come in and help grow exponentially.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, and I know we actually talked about this, on our prep before the panel, right? And Nicola, it was interesting because I was like, can we even use the term bootstrapping for a service business, right? Because the service business, first things first, you can't kind of go out and raise to even start it, right? And so it's a service business, and so I think it's helpful to just be mindful of when you use the term bootstrapping, right? Like if you're starting a business, there's a solution, there's a problem you want to solve, right? And so you go out there trying to get customers, and if you get customers, then you're solving, and then you're moving along, right? And so it goes back to what I was saying earlier about kind of being mindful of the startup world, or the terms that we sometimes just throw around, right? Like if you're running a service business, the term bootstrapping doesn't even really apply, right? Because no matter what, you can't even raise funding for it, right? I mean, at least until you get to a point where you can productize it, right? And so I think I would, when it comes to service, I would totally throw away the word bootstrapping for service business, in a sense that it's service, and as you mentioned or alluded to a little bit, as you're looking at this next biotech company, to your point, you almost can't really bootstrap a biotech company, right? You kind of have to get external partners, right? And so, anyways, that's just what I would say, right? Like when it comes to some business, I think we have to throw away the bootstrapping term. You're building a company, you're providing a service, and you're getting paid for it. I think it's when it comes to startups that we have to really think about what does bootstrapping look like, and how do we evolve from there.
Yeah. And I just see from one of the audience members an interesting opinion about the difference between bootstrapping and organic growth. Is bootstrapping is a funding strategy where founders use personal savings and revenue to fund operations, retaining full control. Organic growth is a method of expansion using internal resources often, but not exclusively paired with bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is how you fund, while organic growth is how you scale. That's thanks to one of the AI chatbots. But anyway, but moving on. So we talk a lot about business survival during business bootstrap, and we know statistically the bootstrap period could be anywhere up to 3 years I've seen before the first raise is actually done. So what was some of the real personal costs that you went through during this time? How did you manage it? And especially, let's talk a bit about some of the near-death experiences where you thought this is done. Who wants to go first? Katis.
Yeah, well, there are a few occasions where we in the at least in the previous startup, we had situation where we were not quite sure we can make the payroll the following month. So it's kind of scary situations. We eventually pulled out of it using creative financing from the banks and others, and were lucky enough to get a sizable purchase order which we could invoice right away and get paid. So we kind of managed to pull the plane back up into the sky before it crashed down. So there are some interesting times, and looking back, we would slightly do things differently instead of operating that close to the edge. And then there's another experience where we the funding was going to close with what was it, 2-month runway at that time when it is another previous startup, and it didn't happen. And for whatever reason, it did not happen, and we had to scramble and scurry and get some alternate financing done just in time. So twice in my previous lives, we had come close to dying, so to speak. Each time luck was on our side, but counting on luck is not a good idea. So one advice I would give is to plan for have a series of plan B, plan C, and be ready to make some difficult, ugly decisions early on instead of delaying it. Deferred maintenance is expensive.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Aisha.
Yeah, also multiple, too many to count near-death experiences. I think, yeah, like when people say founders have grit, like when you've lived through it, you're just like, yes, when you've close to died so many times. And I absolutely, I think, like, have a plan that this is it. This is also just now how I think as a human being, is I always just have a plan B, C, D, E, all the way down. And so we had situations, COVID, I saw someone mention COVID in the chat. Our business, my first business, relies on people connecting with each other. And then you have a pandemic with a respiratory disease where people can't connect in person. And so our business was essentially threatened, it was existential. And so during situations like that, I think it's also been important to have the right people around you, like super important. We've had, investors who've stepped in very last minute. We've had network where people have been friends of our investors and personally put in cash to help the business just get through like a month or two. Like we've just really tried to surround ourselves with people who believe in the sort of mission and vision of what it is that we're trying to do. And I think that's important. And then also like the default alive becomes super important. So even after you raise, being able to look at like, what is the minimum amount for me to be default alive in this business, because you can always go back to that when you run out of funds, right? You can scale down, you can retrench, you can, reduce operation size, whatever it is. But I think it's always good to know in the back of your mind, like, what is the minimum that I need to keep this business going? And then I think linked to that also, like, your business inherently should have value outside of as soon as possible. And again, it's different for different businesses, but like inherently be able to generate value and be valuable to people outside of investor funds coming into it. So for us, the business was like, well, we've got people who earn an income through this business, and that's valuable to someone. We've got a business that's valuable to customers. We've got technology that's valuable. So almost stripping apart like all of the pieces of what it is that you've built. And again, this is like where you start to get really scrappy if you need to, but then you start to go, well, who finds value in this? And we'll talk to them about a conversation about funding or helping the business get through if we need to.
Thank you. Serge and Nicola.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is very different in a way in which, when I started my first true tech company, right, after that initial exit, which again, like that first business was a service business, right? We were I'm a software engineer. So we were building apps and website for clients. So people were just paying me I didn't even know I was going to start a business, even after people were paying me, I was like, oh, this is cool, right? To me, that's what I thought, right? But it wasn't until I started my first true tech business that I realized, first things first, we're going to bring this in, right? Is that, especially in the startup world, there's actually the discrimination aspect, right? Again, I say this because I'm a foreigner initially. I'm from Togo. I didn't grow up in a culture where people looked at you differently, right? Just because of the way you look. I mean, that's just fact, right? And so I started this tech business insanely ambitious, right? And I had the vision. I mean, in fact, it actually was proven by one of our competitors, right? And so that told me I wasn't like, I mean, that was crazy, but I wasn't wrong, right? Let's just put it that way, right? And when I started this business, no matter what I did, I just could never fundraise. I was like, man, what the hell is happening? We have a legit business here. We're in 3 different cities. My peers are being successful in fundraising, but no matter what I do, I'm not fundraising, Then that's when personally for me, that's when I actually took a second and looked at it and I was like, oh, what the hell, this is what's happening, right? But along the way, what that meant was that they were absolutely near death. I mean, I actually literally almost died through this experience, right? Like actually, right? And that's because we run out of resources, but I believe in the vision so much, right? You talk about grades, right? I believe in the vision so much. I'm like, man, something's going to change. Something's going to change. You know what I mean? And I literally started skipping meals. Like I would like have coffee for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Like that's how hard I was like going at it. Again, I think sometimes when you believe in a vision, you just go after it, right? And that's what I mean, right? Like it was actually proven by a competitor that went public like maybe 4 or 5 years ago for $20 billion, right? And they were building the exact platform that we're building. So in many ways, I was like, cool. I'm glad we got it. We like I was right. But whatever the case, we had to move past that, right? But I share this to say, oftentimes when you get into business, and I think now we have a lot of data and we know, you need to have plan A, B, C, D, and Z, right? Like Aisha said. But when I started, I wasn't thinking in that way. I saw a vision, which was a real problem, right? And I set myself up to go all in on it, right? And again, this is what I mean by in terms of discrimination, right? Like for example, Kathy's mentioned how, sometimes you can just talk to investors. I think things have gotten better. I just want to be clear on that, right? I'm not trying to be very pessimistic here whatsoever. But things have gotten better, but there's actually a certain demographic that you can't just be like, hey, let me call up a couple friends, to like, you know what, the boat is sinking. We need a couple friends to come save us. No, right? There's some, you just don't have that option, right? And so I do hear story of founders who are like, man, yeah, we just reached out to some investors. They came through. Look, underrepresented founders don't have that option, and even in good times, no one is even coming and investing in your company. So when things are going south, it's even worse. Right. And so, so you kind of have to have, plan, B, C, D, and E. And what that looks like oftentimes for underrepresented founders is, and I talk about your network initially, right? Well, it's that angel investor that comes along, right? Who's putting in 5K, who's putting in 20K, right? It may not be the $1 million raise that you're anticipating, right? But hey, there's someone who's giving you the hard-earned 10K, the hard-earned 25K, right? Maybe sometimes you look, you get 100K. That's amazing, right? So, and then are you still bootstrapping then? It's tough to say, but here's the thing: you get in the resources that are helping you move along, right? And I think that's the key, right? So, anyways, the premise is, with all that said, there's still some groups that can just like hit up the network and be like, hey, things are going south. Can you like bail us out? Right. And so you have to be extra mindful of that and recognize that your network is really, I mean, this is actually cliche, right? Your network I'm sorry, your network is your network, right? And oftentimes that goes into another things that is very prevalent in the startup world, right? Where folks will come to you and be like, hey, don't take check from 20 investors. Like, no, I'm sorry. See you later. I'm going to take checks for 20 investors, right? Because, again, we talked about this certain demographic where the traditional VC is not funding, right? Well, who am I to take an advice when someone is willing to give me their 20K check, right? I'm not going to be living in a romantic world where I'm waiting for that $1 million check when there's like 10 people willing to give me 20K each, right? I'm going to take that, right? And so it becomes very much, you have to be smart about how your business operates. Sometimes you have to look at the demographic, right? Again, things are getting better for all of us as founders. But you have to recognize that we didn't have these options, a couple of years back, right? Even for me, as far as back as 2015, which is fairly still recent, right? So always just be mindful of what's available to you.
Yeah. Nicola.
Boy, it's never, ever, ever underestimate the value also of a peer group like this, to be able to share the learnings and to be able to talk about the things that really, really matter, right? And there's a few things that I think everyone said, and I suppose I just want to kind of go back to those. And Aisha answered, I think you both particularly alluded to this. You need to have visibility, very, very clear visibility into where exactly your company is at any given point in time. And I genuinely think, and Maria, you and I and Katie have had this conversation about how critical it is to have that visibility in terms of not just your spend, of course your spend, but also visibility into your customers, into what they're doing, how everything is tying together, because the sooner you know when you are in trouble, the better. And you're able to even start thinking about what you're going to do about it. And, everyone being so honest here, I think is just wonderful, and again, for us, our biggest thing was, where was the next customer coming from? How are we going to land the next, clinical trial program? And, in our position, which I think maybe is not unique, but, we were in a peer group where there were some incredibly strong companies that we were going up against when we were bidding for contracts and things. And, as a small, scrappy startup, we were considered a massive risk. So our customer acquisition cost was phenomenal. It was phenomenal in terms of headspace and what we had to do to that, but also in terms of how we moved on when we weren't able to acquire customers. And then, the disappointment, because again, why do you set up a company? You set up a company because you genuinely believe you can provide something amazing, right? And that's what gets you out of bed. It's what makes you put your money in, makes you ask your friends and family and everyone else to put their money into, right? So what, in terms of making sure you can do certain things, I suppose having the visibility into your operations, into knowing exactly where your spend is going, why it's going into different places. It sounds so basic, but honestly, it is just so critical. And I just worry that when you're in startup bootstrap mode, it's kind of, it's one of those things that maybe you think you have a handle on, but do you really? Do you know exactly where your burn and where that cliff edge is for you, and how can you proactively plan to not have that terrible sinking heart feeling as much as possible, but to know that you're gonna be able to, you're gonna make it, because if you've gotten as far as taking the step, boy, that's to me that's just, it's amazing. And again, look, peer groups and conversations like this, surrounding yourself with the right people, huge.
No, thanks for that, Nicola. I do want to just get to a question from Nahid online. It says, given the large sales revenue cycles of life science sectors, how can we optimize our bootstrapping strategy to stay afloat long enough to see meaningful profits?
Well, I'll tell you, if you're in the medical product development business, it is a singularly difficult issue because you have to get your product through a regulatory process before you can sell it. Now, you can, obviously, there's the whole, what we call the lifestyle sector, and that's different. But again, it is a bit of a different ballgame because you are under the regulatory scrutiny, and people are always looking for ways around that. And there many times there just isn't, which is why you need to take on investment, which is why bootstrapping is not necessarily the best idea in life sciences ever, and I just think you've got to be incredibly careful about what your real goal is. And if your real goal is to create an amazing, safe product that's going to help people, well, then you need to look at how you're going to finance all of the incredibly expensive development that's going to go with that. And that's really, I think, the best I can say on that.
Yeah, I 100% Nicola. The only thing also just sort of being kind of adjacent to life sciences, but my background is in genetics, and it sort of wanted to build a biotech. Is Thankfully there are different types of capital and financing available. And it's way more common now, and not sort of, there isn't a question mark over companies that raise capital through blended financing. And so there's so many vehicles from, sort of the more traditional safes and, funding that comes with like phased comps and milestone-based comps, to grant funding, not just from government bodies, but also from family offices and philanthropic organizations. There are funding companies now that are set up to try and help founders retain more equity early on, and sort of reward, again, milestone-based earn backs. So there's, thank goodness, lots of different ways that you can structure funding to account for the fact that your business may be heavily capital intensive before you're able to show meaningful milestones or results.
Yeah, and it's well understood too, right? Like a lot of biotech investors or life science investors know and anticipate that as a, biotech company, you're not going to be making money for like some time, right? And so, yeah, so just wanted to agree with you as well on that. And then when you talk about funding, there's the SBIR, right? So there's all these government entities that can help you with the milestone based funding as well. Yeah.
Oh, Maria, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm hearing.
Yeah, sorry. That's hopefully you hear me now. I said let's move a bit to the decisions where you needed to pivot, where the data said one thing, but your gut said something else. So walk us through some of the specific decisions on how you keep the emotional factors out of this decision. And I'd like to start with you, Kathies.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But by the way, pivot is a reality of startups. Don't take it in any negative way. Look around you. Look at the business plan that Facebook had when they did the first round funding, and look at Facebook as a company today. And same goes to Netflix. Same goes to even Google. So no company stays the way they did the first pitch or the second pitch or even a third round sometimes. So pivots are necessary, and I'll tell you one specific example in our case. So we were launched with being the independent source of truth when it comes to methane emissions into the environment. And our go-to-market strategy until 2024, end of 2024, was essentially a collaborative approach with the people who are doing a lot of the, producing a lot of these emissions as a regular course of business, and they're trying to reduce and get this under control. But as we all know, things kind of suddenly changed in January 2025, and the regulatory-driven business models were pretty much thrown out of the window overnight, literally. So companies like us who had a GTM centered around that, all of a sudden got completely, overnight, you saw your revenues going up and down, and overnight somebody suddenly shut off the engines. So you can do two things. You can sit and complain about the situation all day long, or you can say, okay, you're going to turn, look at the big step back, look at the big picture, and go back to the first principles and say, what else is, if your first principles were correct, there has to be another way somebody's going to value what you do. So, what is the next immediate adjacency that you can pivot to where you can restart the engine and start flying again? And that's what we did. So essentially what we did, we had a business model called Paradigm, business unit called Paradigm, which was essentially a more collaborative model with the industry. When that suddenly vanished overnight, we immediately did a pivot towards a new business unit called Scope One, where now we no longer have any collaborative approach. We are becoming a truly independent source of truth. That is, we are collecting the data without any collaboration with the folks who are generating emissions. And that switchover took us about 6 months, and we are officially launching the first revenue milestone on the new business unit next month during the San Francisco Climate Week. So that is a kind of little bit of a nerve-wracking, because that means, suddenly revenue dropped and expenses are still going on, and all the previous business plans about runway and all these things out of the window. You need to have the support of your investors. You need to have you need to maintain the morale of the team. You need to realign the troops, so to speak, in the new direction. And that's what Pivot is all about. So I think we are fairly successful in pulling this off in 6 months. Not always possible to do something, a rapid turnaround in such a short time frame, but so that is our experience of a pivot.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, we've also pivoted numerous times, both with my previous business and with our new company, Pandora Health, which is in digital care for chronic health, for women's chronic health conditions. And I think similar to what Kathis is saying, like you've got to rally the team round, and you've got to communicate. And I think, so I like founder psychology through all of this stuff is so important. I was thinking, as Nicola was talking about, like knowing your numbers, I was actually thinking another thing that happens also often with when you need to bootstrap is that things are bad and you don't want to look at your accounts because they look bad, and it's going to tell you something that's scary and horrible, and that reinforces something that is not optimistic and aligned with the story that you have to tell yourself as a founder. And similarly with the pivot, you can get into this mindset where your gut is it, and where data that is contrary to what you believe feels like an attack. And so you have to think data is just signal, and my gut is it's pattern recognition that I have from having experienced something, being the customer, experiencing building the business, whatever it is. And the two aren't necessarily contradictory or conflicting. They just are two sources of input. And this is where I think a team, both in terms of communication for the actual pivot and bringing them along on the journey, but also using the team as a sounding board, can be super, super important. And so I've always tried to have both my internal team. My husband is my co-founder in both of our businesses, but we are very different people to each other. And I actively use advisors, our investors who are who get this type of thinking. I use them as a counsel and as a soundboard to say, listen, this is where we are. I have this resistance, but I feel like this might be the right way to go. What do you think? Do you think I should do ABC? And that's really helped with pivoting, and then also thinking about the decision as there are things where the pivot is a very, very big pivot. And again, that can be very scary. I've told everyone we're doing this. We've built the business around this. All of our infrastructure and tech is geared towards this. And then there's smaller decisions that you can make, that you can sort of tell yourself, or position as experiments that can help again with validation in the direction of a pivot or not. And so I always try and do that as well, sort of break things down into like, what are the little experiments that you can do? So this is not scary, and it's not going to be costly. And if we need to turn back or redirect, we can do that. And then the last thing, just around pivoting, is also that we've done like sort of fake pivots sometimes as well. Or I don't know what to call it, but it's like with with Pandora, our play, it was a data play. We'd spoken to pharma companies, they were interested in the data. And then things changed in biotech, sort of, post-COVID kind of correction, and people weren't as interested in data. And so we had to pivot, but it was actually just, okay, we'll get the data eventually, but we need to monetize on the way there. And so let's look at a way to get paying customers for this little piece of the platform or this little piece of like the bigger vision that helps us get to the data that will obviously be valuable, that, when we have it, we can try and sell it to those partners, as opposed to saying, pay for us, all the way along the journey. And so they also like these little steps that you can do that aren't like a full pivot, but are just like a risk mitigation, sort of, yeah, like they're kind of I don't know, a side strategy that, gets you to where you want to get in the end anyways.
Great. And we do have a question from Hugo, where he says, most time company was bootstrapped without choice. If the founder has a choice, i.e. angel investor willing to invest safe from day one, safe note, would you recommend bootstrapping by choice if maximizing success of the company is the goal? And I think that also has to do with the timing of investments, because sometimes getting that first investment may take a long time as well, right?
I get this a lot from founders who are like, have this angel investor who's like interested in investing, but like, I think I want to bootstrap. I'm like, take the money. If someone is coming to you and they're offering, again, right, to invest in your company. I mean, that said, right, be mindful if the person is coming in and said, look, I want to invest, say 50K and have 50% of the company, like say no to that, right? Like, see you later, right? But if the person is actually like, well, that's interesting. Like, are you taking investment? Find a way to structure immediately and take that money. Like, if you don't need the money, then leave it in the bank, right? But the thing is, a lot of people misconstrue the fact that, capital can become very rare, right? And they oftentimes say, raise money, you don't need it, and things like that. And so, anyways, I meet a lot of founders who, they're like, should I take this money? Like, I'm like, why are you debating, right? Stop being too afraid of the whole, I'm going to lose equity, right? The thing is, companies are built based, and we've talked about people, right? Companies are built based on the people who are around you, right? No single company is ever built by yourself, right? There's advisors, anyways, and so as a result, if there's already an opportunity on the table, you take it, don't delay, right? Because oftentimes what's going to happen is if that person say, hey, I'm interested in investing, but you're out there trying to figure out, like, what is it that I want to do? Well, by the time you may want to come back to them, life happens, right? Suddenly they're like, oh, you know what? Unfortunately, like maybe someone in the family died. Now I need to do this, right? And so whenever someone is open and willing to give you money, take it immediately, right? Before anything changes. That way you're in a position where, the person is not ending up backing out because life events happen, but you're in a position where you basically you need to be operating from a position of strength, right? So if someone gives you the money, take it. And again, if you absolutely don't need it, leave it in the bank, right? Anyways, that's just all I wanted to say in regards to that.
Anyone else?
We talked as well, didn't we, about, and just to pull on that thread a little bit, which I think what someone said in the comments is absolutely, but equally, you take it on your terms, right? That's it. You have to understand what it is you're getting into. What does that other person or that company, what do they want from you in return? And is it something you're willing to give? And only you can know that, and your team. You have to make that decision based on your business. There's no right or wrong answer to this in some ways, but absolutely. And, being trying to raise funds right now, that's exactly it. If someone's willing to give you money, you want to entertain it and you want to understand okay, great. What strings does it come with? And is it worth it for us to do that? And then you have to make those decisions as best you can for your particular situation.
Yeah. And I think it's also, Serge, as you mentioned, if it's a bad investment deal on the table, do not take it, because that can kill your company. And I've also seen it so many times with founders that we work with, sometimes you're really desperate for the money, but if it's a really bad investment deal, that investment, especially if it's a controlling investor, that can kill your company as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I always think as long as it's not egregious, right? Like, I've had, one of my previous companies, the one that I, talked about, in the life of the company, we met these investors and they were like, man, we're so excited about what you're building. We want to come and we want to invest. I think they wanted to invest 500K. I can't remember the number now, but they wanted 50% of the company. And I was like, like if this is the first round that we're raising 50%, that's nuts, right? That said, we're also in an ecosystem that I forgive them. I don't have any, negative towards them, right? But we're also in an ecosystem that didn't understand startups, right? And so I guess that also speaks to, we talk about people who are around you, it also speaks to the environment that you're in, right? What ecosystem are you building your company in? And in this particular ecosystem, which I was not familiar with, right? I moved there because there was promises of, growing tech scene, growing hospitality. I'm like, okay, cool, we're in tech hospitality, let's do it, right? I didn't realize how not well structured the ecosystem was, right? But I was actually trying to educate these guys like, no, if you take 50%, our company is dead. Like no one else is going to want to come in and this based on this, right? So obviously, I actually walked away from that deal, right? Because it just was, you were basically signing your death, whatever, like certificate, right? Because no other investor will want to come in that deal, right? And I'll go further to say this. Post that company, I actually had a friend, technically someone who could have invested in that first company, reached out to me, was like, hey, look, obviously he saw my skills and abilities, like, look, come help me build this company, right? I'm like, sure, restaurants, tech space, I got you, let's do it, right? And he wanted to be a silent partner. I'm like, man, dude, this is not the right way to do it, especially if we want to build a tech company, right? But now, mind you, again, I think we're all learning along the way, right? And this was definitely learning for me. And as I shared the story, I was between a rock and a hard place, right? And I was like, I've been trying to convince people of my own company for the past 3 years, and no one's believing in me. And I kid you not, my logic was simple. I'm like, maybe this is stuff that Y founders get funding for. So sure, I'll help you build it, right? Like it was just straight up that. And I helped him build it, but along the way, I fought so hard to tell this guy, I'm like, no, like the structure that you're advocating for, it doesn't work in tech, right? And he's like, and I was like, you know what? I'll help you build it. Let's do it. Lo and behold, when it came to actually us raising, the investors came back. And because I actually did a good, again, we were building the company, right? The investors came back, they're like, yeah, based on this cap table, there's no way like we're gonna fund this. And he's like, oh, you were so right, right? And we wanted to, but even so, he still didn't want to let go of that relationship, right? And I was like, you know what? I can't be in this anymore because I'm trying to make sure that we can actually build this company in the right way. I'm not trying to be aggressive or predatory towards you, right? So as a founder, it's important to, that said, again, for me, it was a learning lesson, right? But it further reinforces the fact that even when someone wants to invest, right? And this guy invested close to $1 million into the company, right? Even though I was doing my best to make sure that we have the best structure so that we can move forward, right? This particular partner was just about the old school way of thinking, right? So your ecosystem matters a lot in terms of people understanding how startups work, right? And we're talking about safes, right? Safes are the new thing now. It's no longer about convertible notes, right? So if you're in an ecosystem where someone wants to do a convertible note, I would question a little bit, do it safe. It's just easier, it's faster, we all get things done. So just want to share that.
Yeah, I would add one more point to that question from that audience person. I would say when an investor comes in and asks you, somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I would like to invest something," actually, that is an acid test for your original business plan. In the sense, are you getting swayed emotionally simply because somebody walking in and showing you money, which means your original plan is flawed? Because if you had a bootstrap plan where you said, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to go to the milestone A, and you are marching towards that, and somebody coming and asking, okay, I'm going to invest, so and so much, so would love to invest so and so much, so that has to be, if that fits into your model, you take it, right? For example, you defer the terms of the safe or a note such that you don't talk about cap, maybe just give them only the discount. Will they take it? Because that is consistent with your bootstrap plan, where you want to get to the milestone before you're even talking about valuation conversation, for example. So if that fits your model, you take it. Otherwise, you say thank you, no thank you, and keep marching. To me, that I have some failures in my past of not staying disciplined to the first principles of the GTM plan. And I learned my lessons not to get swayed, because I think I felt that that is actually a test for myself in terms of how well thought out the plan and the business plan of the company is. So yeah, I think it's no simple yes or no answer to anything
Yeah.
like this. Just like anything else in these topics, there is no simple yes or no answer. But I think I will go back to the basic first principles, where do you really have a clear eye view of where you are marching towards?
Yeah, and that's quite good. I mean, there's Hugo again. He says after bootstrapping starting to generate revenue, it can get harder to raise. A company started to generate 1 million revenue and valuation around 20 million. The founder likes to raise 1.5 partial bootstrapping, but the typical lead investor like to get at least 15% of equity. I invest around 3 million. How do you resolve that now? Anyone want to attempt to respond to that? Because it seems like the terms and the valuations might have been strange, and I would.
I mean, the question is who's setting the valuation, right?
Yeah.
As a founder, are you just saying because we have $1 million in revenue, my valuation is 20 million, right? And if that's the case, you need data backing it, right? Usually, you need to look at comparables, right? You need to tell the investor, hey, companies around our stage, right, in this type of geographic, location, right, have raised based on these terms, right, or caps. And so I think that could be a proxy, but there's so obviously, and I think a lot of you know this, the living in Silicon Valley, there's actually some truth to it gets harder to raise money when you have revenue. Now it depends on the revenue amount, right? If you're doing $1 million, it should not be hard to raise, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to talk to the right partners, set the right cap, right valuations, and all is good to go. If you pre-seed, right, and you have revenue, that's where it's hard to raise because, and this is actually a trick that, again, being in Silicon Valley, I've seen it, I know it, I was fortunate with some of the benefit of this too, which is founders, the minute you say your revenue at the pre-seed stage, investors are like, oh, if you're doing 10K, why aren't you doing 100K? It's like, no. Like, this is not like, come on now. You know what I mean? And so you have to be very smart and very cautionary how you disclose your revenue numbers, right? Because then at that stage, investors, if revenue is the only reason why investors are looking to invest at the pre-seed, I found that's a challenge, right? But if you have a meaningful revenue like $1 million and you're trying to figure out, I think, what's the question again? Yeah, so typical lead investor, let the lead investors give you the cap, right? The valuation. It's not unusual for lead investors to want certain equity stake, and that's like they usually have a mandate, right? So therefore, let them give you a valuation that gives them that 15% equity that they need, and then let other investors come in and fill the round. Right. And you'll find that's oftentimes not as predatory as you might think. Right. And so, anyways, again, it's just about working with the investors and understanding what's happening and how you can get things going.
Yeah. And thank you for that. We are at time, but there is one question that I do want to just ask as well, and then I think we'll wrap up. And if we can just keep our answers brief on this, obviously in this AI era, things have changed dramatically about how we look at business, how we run the businesses. Knowing what you know about AI, does it really help you scale faster? how are you looking at applying AI to get to the next level, and does it really drive the ROI for you?
Yeah, I'll maybe take a stab at it. I mean, it's been hugely helpful for us. I keep on delaying new hires in my plan because I can just do the job myself with the help of AI. So the cost compression impact is huge, huge. I think probably hype being like, you need 10% of the team realistically building a startup at this stage, unless you're sort of very pure AI, very little ops. But I think that I probably need 30% of the payroll staff that and marketing budget than I thought I would need maybe 18 months ago. Yeah, so I mean it's very, very real. It also means, and I was talking to advising a founder yesterday, it also means that your customers and your competitors also have access to many of the same tools that you do. So there's a very real competitive threat, and there is people can just substitute what you're building with internal tools often. So there are real questions about whether traditional SaaS, for example, outside of companies is dead and whether it's just going to be all built internally. So yeah, I think that it pushes things way more to skilled people who understand and care about building in a problem space really well. And for example, what I think about when I'm hiring now is I think about high agency, high execution velocity people who care and who can do things quickly rather than kind of legacy skills and mindset.
Yeah. Kathis.
My recommendation is to step away from the echo chamber and go back and look at the big picture and go back again, as I keep using the word first principles. Your business has to provide some unique value and differentiation and solving somebody's pain that AI-based solutions can help you get there faster. For sure, AI can make your productivity substantially improved. I think to Aisha's point, particularly some of the peripheral, non-critical core tasks, you can definitely do much better, faster, cheaper. So those are all definitely AI benefits. But at the same time, don't get hung up on the hype side of AI, and stay true to what you are offering. If the answer to the question about what you're offering is not solving a genuine pain that is difficult to solve and nobody has solved it yet, and it requires a fairly sizable new set of innovation and complex set of tasks to come together. The answer is if the answer is not yes, then you are vulnerable to the AI disruption. So that's the main filter I would apply.
Thank you for that. And I know we're at time and I've gone a little bit over. I really want to thank my panel for this conversation. And there's so much more to cover around this topic. I also want to thank the audience for attending. And we will be posting the full recording as well on our YouTube channel. So if Katie, if you wouldn't mind just adding in the YouTube channel link, that would be great. But thank you so much. Really appreciate the insights that you have shared, and wishing everyone a great day.
Thanks so much, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.